My name is Isabella. It's funny how life can change in an instant. One moment you're living your dream and the next, it feels like the rug has been pulled out from under you. I never saw it coming. But before the betrayal, everything was perfect. At least that's what I told myself. Maybe it's the same for everyone at the start of a relationship. You want to believe that you've found the one, that everything will fall into place and that you've built something unbreakable. That's exactly what I thought I had with Alex. I met him at a party of all places. He was the kind of guy you notice immediately, tall, dark, and handsome with this incredible charm that made everyone gravitate toward him. And I was no different. We hit it off right away. He had that quiet confidence that was so magnetic, and I found myself falling for him faster than I thought possible. Soon after, we were inseparable. I had never felt more alive. It felt like every moment with him was a dream I never wanted to wake up from. He made me feel seen, loved, and important in a way that no one had before. In my eyes, he was perfect, and I was starting to believe that we were perfect together. For the first time, I started to let my guard down, to believe that love could be simple, that it didn't have to come with complications or heartache. But of course I was wrong. Every relationship has its cracks. And what seemed like perfection on the outside was, in reality, something I couldn't yet see. But for now, everything was still just as it should be. Or so I thought. I couldn't have known that in just a few months, my world would shatter. I couldn't have known that the man I thought I would spend my life with would be the one to betray me the hardest. But that's how it goes sometimes, right? Love, it's never as perfect as we want it to be. And I was about to learn that lesson the hardest way possible. It's strange how you can be so deeply in love with someone and still feel something missing. I used to think that was just the price of love, that you couldn't have everything and that a little uncertainty was just part of the deal. But now I know that when you start questioning your relationship, when the cracks start appearing, that's when you need to pay attention. It wasn't a sudden thing, at least not at first. It was small. Little things that didn't seem like much but added up over time. At first it was just his late nights at work. Or how he'd get a little distant during dinner, his mind elsewhere. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was just busy, stressed. We all had those moments, right? I was willing to overlook it. I convinced myself that nothing had changed. That everything was still fine. But the signs were there, little things I couldn't ignore anymore. The way he would look at his phone and smile. Or the way he'd shrug off my questions about his day. The once frequent, "I love you," became rare. And when he did say it, it felt not like it used to. I wasn't sure when it happened. But somewhere along the way, the feeling of being in control of my life slipped away. Suddenly, I wasn't the only one in his world anymore. And that was when the doubt started creeping in. I couldn't put my finger on it. But something felt wrong. I could feel the distance growing between us. Like a shadow I couldn't outrun. I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to believe that the person I had given my heart to might be drifting away from me. Then came the first real crack, the night he didn't come home. It wasn't the first time he'd stayed out late. But this time it was different. He didn't answer his phone, didn't respond to my texts. And for the first time I felt a pang of fear in my chest. A fear that was more than just worrying about him being late. It was a fear that something had changed. Something irreversible. Something I couldn't take back. I stayed up all night, waiting, hoping he'd come back, hoping he'd explain. But when he finally walked through the door the next morning, it was like nothing had happened. He didn't seem guilty or apologetic. He just looked tired, distant. As if his absence hadn't meant anything to him. As if I hadn't spent the night waiting and wondering. That was the moment I knew. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was happening between us. Something I couldn't fix with just love and patience. Something that was beyond my control. And I had to face it, whether I was ready or not. Over the next few days I noticed more signs. He started spending more time at work. Came home later, and even when he was home he was distracted. I had become a shadow in his life. And he didn't even notice. Or maybe he did. But he didn't care. It was as if he was slowly pulling away. Slipping through my fingers. And I had no way of stopping it. I couldn't help but wonder. Was he seeing someone else? Was he hiding something from me? And the most painful thought of all, did he still love me the way he used to? Sometimes, The hardest part of any relationship is not the fighting or the mistakes, but the moment when you find out the truth. The truth that you were blind to, the truth you were afraid to see. The moment you realize that everything you thought was real wasn't real at all. And that moment hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't know what I expected when I found that phone. Maybe I thought I'd find nothing. Maybe just a few text messages, nothing to worry about. But when I opened it, I found everything I needed to know. It wasn't just a flirtation. It wasn't just a one-time mistake. No, it was an entire secret life. A life I had no idea existed. Ethan and Charlotte. They had been seeing each other for months. Behind my back, behind my trust. I couldn't believe it at first. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. His messages to her were intimate, personal, and affectionate. They talked about everything. Everything except me. It wasn't just the text messages. It was the photos, the plans to meet up, the way they spoke about me like I wasn't even there. I felt like the world had just collapsed beneath me. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. For a few seconds I wondered if it was all a mistake. Maybe this wasn't real. Maybe I had imagined it. But no, it was all there. The proof was staring me in the face and there was no denying it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But most of all, I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to pretend it wasn't true, that this was all just some horrible dream. But it wasn't. It was my reality now. And there was no going back. I couldn't look at the phone anymore. I set it down on the table and walked away. I needed air. I needed to think. I didn't know what to do with myself. Or what to do with the person I had loved so deeply. The next few hours were a blur. I spent most of it pacing around my apartment trying to make sense of what had happened. But nothing made sense. How could Ethan do this to me? How could Charlotte, someone I trusted more than anyone, betray me like this? It didn't feel real. I called Benji. He was my rock, the person who always knew how to make me feel better. I needed him. But even he couldn't help me now. Not with this. Finally, I decided to confront them both. I had to hear it from them to see if what I had found was true. And as much as I dreaded it, I knew I had no choice. I couldn't live with this secret. I needed closure. So I texted Ethan telling him I needed to talk. And that's when the reality hit me again. That simple message was the beginning of the end. I didn't know how things would go after this. But I knew that I couldn't unsee what I had already seen. They say the hardest part is always facing the truth. But sometimes the hardest part isn't just knowing the truth. It's having the courage to confront it. I didn't have that courage, not at first. I wanted to run, to hide, to pretend everything was okay. But deep down I knew I couldn't do that anymore. I had to face them. I had to face the lies and the betrayal no matter how much it hurt. The first step was deciding to meet them. It wasn't easy. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to do it. But in the end, it wasn't about strength. It was about survival. I needed closure. I needed to look them in the eyes and hear it from their mouths. The truth, raw and unfiltered. I texted Alex. My fingers hovered over the screen for a long time, but eventually I typed the message. We need to talk. In person. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew it was time to stop pretending. He agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, the same place we used to go on our first dates. I thought it would be easier there. In the place where everything had started. But it wasn't. It was harder than I could have imagined. He walked in looking the same as always. But everything about him seemed different. His smile felt forced, his eyes not meeting mine. I could feel the weight of the words I had to say. And I could see that he was avoiding the inevitable. But I wasn't going to let him off easy this time. I wasn't going to let him hide from the truth any longer. What's going on, Alex? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady though it trembled. Don't act like you don't know. I know everything. I know about you and Charlotte. The color drained from his face. For a moment he looked like he was about to say something but then stopped himself. Izzy. He started, his voice faltering. It's not what you think. I cut him off. Don't lie to me, I snapped. I've seen the texts, Alex. The pictures. The messages. Don't you dare tell me it's not what I think. You betrayed me. You lied. And you did it with my best friend. I trusted you both. How could you do this to me? His face softened. and I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo what he had done. It wasn't enough to take away the hurt that was threatening to consume me. "I'm sorry, Izzy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for it to go this far. It was a mistake." Mistake. Those two words echoed in my mind, and for a moment I felt the rage building inside me. Mistake? You don't betray someone you love for months and call it a mistake. You don't build a secret life and expect to walk away from it like nothing happened. "No," I said, shaking my head. "It wasn't a mistake. A mistake is something you regret immediately. This was a choice, Alex. A choice you made over and over again." He didn't respond. His face was a mixture of shame and guilt, but it was too little too late. I wasn't sure if he understood the weight of what he had done, but I knew I wasn't going to stick around to find out. "I need you to leave," I said, standing up. "I can't do this anymore. I can't forgive you. I won't forgive you." He opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't want to hear it. I didn't need to hear any more lies. I had heard enough. I turned and walked away, feeling the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. But as I walked out of the cafe, I felt something else, something I hadn't felt in months. I felt free. The next part of this story was harder. I still had to face Charlotte, but now I knew I could handle it. I had just faced the man I loved, and now I had to face the woman who had broken my heart in the worst possible way. And I was ready. Ready to stand up for myself and demand the truth. The pain was sharper than I ever imagined it would be. They tell you that heartbreak is something you can't prepare for. No matter how many times you hear about it, no matter how many books or movies you watch, you can never truly understand it until you feel it yourself. And let me tell you, it felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. I thought I was strong. I thought that when the time came I would be able to handle it with grace. But in that moment, after everything I had learned, I felt like I was crumbling from the inside out. I couldn't even look at Alex without feeling a wave of nausea rise in my throat. How could he? How could he do this to me? The man I thought I would spend my life with, the one I trusted with my heart, had shattered everything, and there was no going back. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the aftermath. It was the feeling of being utterly alone. Even though I wasn't physically alone. Ethan's absence wasn't just in the space next to me, it was in every corner of my life. In every place we had once been together. In every memory that now felt tainted. It wasn't just about losing someone. It was about losing a version of myself. The version of me that believed in love, that believed in the goodness of people. I spent days crying. Days where I didn't even recognize myself. I was angry, I was devastated, and I was empty. I didn't know who I was anymore. I had built my entire life around someone else. Someone who didn't even care enough to tell me the truth. But amidst the anger and hurt, I also started to feel something else. Something that was unexpected. Something that was foreign to me. But something I needed desperately. I started to feel numb. Not in a bad way, but in a way that allowed me to breathe again. For the first time in weeks. I stopped thinking about Ethan, about Charlotte. I stopped asking myself what I had done wrong. And instead I started asking myself, what was next for me? What was I going to do now that everything I had once believed in was gone? I knew the healing process would take time, but I also knew that I couldn't keep holding on to the past. I couldn't keep letting them control my emotions, my actions. I took a step back from everything. From my old life, from my old routine, and from all the reminders of what had happened. I stopped going to the places we used to visit. Stopped seeing the people who reminded me of him. I had to let go. I didn't know how, but I knew it was the only way to survive. The first day I woke up and didn't think about Ethan immediately, I felt this small glimmer of hope. It was tiny, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. I was beginning to heal. Slowly, painfully, but I was healing. And then one day I walked into the coffee shop near my apartment. The same coffee shop where Alex and I used to sit for hours talking about everything. I sat down alone. And I didn't feel a rush of pain. I didn't feel anger or bitterness. I just felt calm. A peace I hadn't felt in months. I looked out the window watching the rain pour down, and I realized something. I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. I wasn't waiting for Ethan to apologize or come back. I wasn't waiting for Charlotte to explain herself. I was waiting for me. For the version of me that had been lost for so long. The version of me that could stand on her own and move forward. And in that moment I knew I was going to be okay. I used to think forgiveness was something you did for someone else. I thought it was about letting go of the anger you carried for someone who had wronged you. But now I understand that forgiveness isn't about them at all. It's about you. It's about freeing yourself from the chains that hold you back. And learning to let go of the pain so it doesn't control you anymore. For the longest time I didn't think I could forgive Alex. Not after everything he did to me. Not after the lies, the secrets, the betrayal. I thought I would never be able to let go of the hurt. Because it felt like letting go of that pain would somehow erase the truth of what he had done to me. But what I didn't realize was that holding on to that pain wasn't keeping the truth alive. It was only hurting me. The turning point came one evening. When I sat in my apartment staring out the window at the city lights. The world outside was still. But inside everything was chaotic. I felt the weight of my own anger. The rage that had been building for months. It was consuming me slowly, piece by piece. I had allowed it to define who I was. And that was when I knew I couldn't live like that anymore. I couldn't keep carrying the burden of the past. I couldn't keep letting my anger dictate my life. The more I held on to the anger, the more I let it control me. It wasn't Alex who was still hurting me, it was me. And if I wanted to move on, if I wanted to truly heal, I had to let it go. It wasn't easy. The first step was admitting that I was still holding on to it. Admitting that I hadn't let go of the betrayal. That I was still letting it poison my thoughts. But once I admitted it, something shifted. It wasn't instant, but it was a start. I started writing in my journal again. I used to write all the time, but after everything with Alex I had stopped. The words didn't come easily. But slowly they started to flow. Writing helped me process what had happened. And slowly I began to understand that my anger wasn't just about him. It was about me too. It was about the fear of not being enough. The fear of being abandoned. The fear of losing myself. I wrote about how I felt betrayed. How I felt like I had lost a part of myself. And I wrote about how hard it was to let go of that feeling. But each time I wrote, I felt a little lighter. A little less trapped by the weight of the past. I spent weeks, maybe even months, working through my emotions. Some days were harder than others. Some days the anger came rushing back. And I wanted to scream, to curse Alex for what he did. But other days I felt at peace. Slowly the pain became a little more distant. Slowly I started to forgive, not just Alex, but myself too. And when the day finally came, when I no longer felt that gnawing ache in my chest, I knew that I had truly forgiven. Not because what happened didn't matter anymore, but because I had found a way to let go of the anger that had held me prisoner for so long. I had freed myself. And in doing so I had healed. I don't know if I'll ever truly forget what happened. I don't think I ever will. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about moving forward. And allowing yourself to live without the weight of the past crushing you. It's about giving yourself permission to be happy again. When I finally ran into Alex again, I didn't feel the urge to scream or cry. Instead, I simply nodded and walked away. There was no bitterness in my heart. There was no hate. Just a quiet understanding that what had happened was part of my past. And it no longer had control over me. I had finally let go. And in that moment I realized that I was ready for the next chapter of my life. Healing isn't a straight line. It's more like a winding road with hills, valleys, and sometimes detours that take you farther than you thought you'd go. But it's still progress. I've learned that healing is messy and it doesn't happen overnight. There are good days and there are bad days. But each day is a step forward, no matter how small. The first few weeks after everything had fallen apart were the hardest. I cried more than I thought was possible. I spent countless nights lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I got here. I felt lost, like I didn't recognize the person I had become. But slowly I started picking up the pieces. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't some magical moment where everything clicked back into place. But every day I began to see a glimmer of who I was before Alex. The woman who wasn't defined by anyone else's love. I started small. I took long walks in the park by my apartment just to get some fresh air. I started going to the gym again, something I had put off for months. I called my best friend Lauren and started spending more time with her. It wasn't about distracting myself. It was about rediscovering who I was outside of my past relationships. But healing wasn't just about the physical things. It was about the emotional work I had to do. I started therapy, something I had always considered but never followed through with. Talking to someone outside of my circle gave me the space I needed to process everything I had been through. I learned so much about myself, about my fears, my desires, and what I needed from a partner. Therapy helped me see that it wasn't just Alex's betrayal that hurt me. It was also the way I had allowed myself to lose sight of my own worth. I had put my value in someone else's hands, and when that fell apart, I didn't know who I was anymore. As I worked through the pain, I also worked on setting boundaries. I stopped allowing people to take advantage of me. I stopped accepting the bare minimum from anyone, including myself. I began to stand up for what I needed, even if it was uncomfortable. I learned that it was okay to prioritize myself. It was okay to say no. It was okay to put my needs first, even if that meant disappointing others. Over time, the anger I had felt started to fade. I wasn't holding on to it anymore. I had let go, and with that, I found a sense of peace. It didn't mean everything was perfect. It didn't mean I was over it. It meant I was moving forward, and that was enough. I started to realize that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. I had survived the worst part of my life, and now I was learning to rebuild. One day, I was walking down the street when I passed by a store window. I stopped and looked at my reflection, and for the first time in a long time, I saw someone I could be proud of. Someone who had been through hell and came out the other side, still standing. Someone who was ready to take on whatever came next. I smiled at myself, a genuine smile that didn't come from trying to please anyone, but from a place of self-acceptance. I wasn't the same person I was before Alex. I had changed, and that was okay. I had learned that healing wasn't about going back to who I was, but about becoming the person I was meant to be all along. It was time to let go of the past. It was time to start living for me. And for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. They say life begins where your comfort zone ends. And for the first time in months, I truly felt like I was stepping out of mine. After everything that had happened, I could have easily stayed in my shell. I could have let my past define me, let my hurt and betrayal shape the rest of my life. But something inside me stirred. A small, quiet voice that told me there was more to life than pain. That there was hope, and there was a future waiting for me to take hold of it. So I did. I started small, taking baby steps, trying new things that terrified me. I signed up for a cooking class, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I took up photography again, something that used to bring me so much joy, but had been buried under the weight of my past. I started saying yes to opportunities one would have turned down before, things I used to think I wasn't good enough for. One of the first big changes came when I decided to move. It wasn't something I had planned, but after months of living in the same place where everything reminded me of Alex, I knew it was time to leave. I found a small apartment on the other side of the city, one with big windows and a view of the skyline. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like I was building something just for me. Moving into my new place was like shedding an old skin. I packed up everything in boxes, and as I sorted through the memories, I realized how far I had come. The photographs of me and Alex, some I kept, some I threw away, no longer had the same weight. They were just memories now. Pieces of my past. And they didn't define me anymore. In the midst of all the change, I also started focusing on my career. I had spent so much time thinking about relationships, about love, that I had put my dreams on the back burner. But now I was determined to make my career a priority. I began networking, reaching out to people I admired in my industry. I started taking on freelance projects again, the kind I used to love. I didn't know exactly where it would lead, but I was excited to find out. I could feel the fire inside me reigniting. As time passed, I also started thinking about love again. At first, I was terrified at the thought of opening my heart up to someone new. How could I trust again after everything that happened? But I had learned something important in the past months. Trust isn't about being naive. It's about being strong enough to be vulnerable, even when it's hard. And so, I started taking small steps toward dating again. Knowing that I wasn't ready to rush into anything serious, but also knowing that I was open to the possibility of love. But through all of it, the most important thing I had gained was a sense of self-worth. I was no longer defined by what happened to me, by the pain, by the betrayal. I was defined by who I was, someone who had the strength to move forward, someone who had the courage to embrace life, no matter what had happened in the past. One afternoon I was sitting on my new balcony, a cup of coffee in hand, looking at the city below, and I realized something. I was happy. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally found peace within myself. I had forgiven, I had healed, and I was ready for whatever came next. For the first time in a long time I felt like my life was mine again. And that was the most beautiful feeling of all. Life, I realized, doesn't stop throwing challenges at you just because you've had a rough past. I thought after everything that happened, I'd finally be able to relax and let life just unfold. But the truth is, life is full of new hurdles, new obstacles. And you can't hide from them. You have to face them head-on, no matter how daunting they seem. It was a few months after I had moved into my new apartment that the first big challenge hit. At first, I thought I had everything figured out. I had my own space, I was working on my career, I was healing. But then something unexpected happened. I was promoted at work. On the surface, this should have been a great thing. It was everything I had been working toward. But the promotion came with a huge amount of responsibility. And with it, a sense of pressure I hadn't anticipated. I found myself working long hours, barely having time for anything else. I started feeling overwhelmed again. The pressure to perform, to prove myself, to succeed, it was all weighing on me. I wasn't used to handling so much at once, especially after everything I had already gone through. At the same time, I was faced with the challenge of keeping my personal life intact. The past few months had been about me rebuilding, focusing on myself. But now I had to find a balance. How could I take care of myself, keep moving forward in my career, and still make time for the people who mattered most to me? One night, after a particularly long day at work, I sat down with a cup of tea and thought about it all. I realized something important. I had to stop seeing these challenges as obstacles. I had to see them as opportunities. The promotion wasn't just a test of my career. It was a test of my strength, of how much I had truly grown. And the personal challenges? They were opportunities to prove to myself that I could handle whatever life threw my way. To show myself that I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The next day I walked into work with a new mindset. I wasn't going to let the pressure get to me. I was going to take things one step at a time. And if I stumbled, I would get back up. Because that's what I had learned. Life doesn't stop for you. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. But that doesn't mean you can't keep moving forward. That same week, I made time to meet up with Lauren. We sat at a cafe catching up, laughing like we used to. I realized that I hadn't let anyone into my life in a while. I had kept people at arm's length, focused on my own healing. But now, I understood that part of healing was also allowing others in. Letting them share in my joy, in my progress. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to let go of the idea that I had to do everything on my own. That I had to carry all the weight of my world alone. But slowly, I began to understand that it wasn't weakness to ask for help. It was strength. Strength to recognize when I needed support. Strength to accept help without guilt or shame. And then came another challenge, facing the possibility of love again. I wasn't sure if I was ready. I had been so hurt in the past that the idea of letting someone else in felt terrifying. But life had taught me that you can't stay stuck in fear forever. I needed to give myself the opportunity to experience love again. Not because I needed it, but because I deserved it. It wasn't easy, but I started dating again slowly. I didn't rush into anything, but I was open to the idea that love, when it came, would be different this time. It wouldn't be about losing myself in someone else. It would be about sharing my life, my dreams, my hopes with someone who truly saw me. And as the weeks passed, I felt myself becoming more and more open to that possibility. To the idea that I was worthy of love. That I could build a future with someone who would cherish me the way I deserved. These new challenges were exactly what I needed. They weren't easy, but they were shaping me into the woman I was meant to be. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what was ahead. I was excited for it. When I look back at everything, I can hardly recognize the person I used to be. Feels like a lifetime ago, the woman who was so afraid of letting go. The one who thought she had no choice but to live in the shadow of someone else's actions. But now I see a different version of myself. A version that has learned, that has grown, and that is ready for whatever the future holds. I feel free in a way I never thought possible. The future doesn't seem so scary anymore. At one point, the thought of it terrified me. I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to face it on my own. But now I know I am. I've built myself back up from the ground up. I've learned how to trust myself again. And I know I'm ready to take on whatever comes my way. I've also learned that life doesn't always go as planned. There will be moments when things don't make sense, when everything seems out of control. But that's okay. I've learned that it's not about always being in control. It's about finding peace in the uncertainty. It's about trusting that even when things are chaotic, I'll find my way. So now I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to the next chapter of my life. I'm excited about what's to come. I'm building a future for myself, not based on anyone else's approval, but based on my own dreams and my own desires. For the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I'm waiting for someone else to make me happy. I'm not waiting for Alex to apologize, or for anyone else to validate my worth. I know now that my happiness is in my own hands. It always has been. I'm building my career with confidence, knowing that I can accomplish anything I set my mind to. I'm growing my friendships, reconnecting with the people who support me, and letting go of the ones who bring negativity into my life. And I'm opening myself up to love again. I know that love doesn't need to look like it did in the past. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be real. And I'm ready for that. The future doesn't have all the answers. But that's part of the beauty. It's about the unknown. It's about making it my own. It's about taking risks, stepping out of my comfort zone, and embracing whatever comes next. I still have a long way to go, but for the first time in years, I feel like I'm on the right path. And no matter what happens, I know I'll be okay, because I've survived the hardest part. I've learned to stand on my own, and now I'm ready to thrive. This is my future, and I'm excited to see where it takes me. Sometimes when you're finally free from the things that once held you back, you start to realize that freedom comes with a responsibility to yourself, to keep pushing forward, to keep striving even when it feels like everything around you is still moving too fast. But I also learned that moving forward doesn't mean doing it all on your own. It's about finding the strength to ask for help when you need it and trusting that the world isn't as cold as it may seem. A few months into my new life, things were beginning to feel right. I had my apartment, my job was going well, and I had started dating again. Everything was slowly falling into place. But just when I thought I had everything under control, life had another surprise for me. My boss, Erica, called me into her office one Friday afternoon. I had been working hard, managing several high-profile projects and making strides in my career. But when she looked at me, there was a seriousness in her eyes that made my stomach churn. "Izzy," she began, "I've been keeping an eye on you, and I think it's time we talk about a new opportunity." My heart skipped a beat. I was hoping for a promotion, but what she said next caught me completely off guard. "We're considering you for a leadership position in our new office in Paris," she said. I was stunned. I'd been with the company for just under a year, and now they were asking me to take on a major role in an entirely new city, in an entirely new country. The idea was exhilarating but also terrifying. I had never even imagined myself living in Paris, let alone leading a team there. I sat there, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. A part of me wanted to jump at the opportunity, to say yes without hesitation. But there was another part of me that was scared. Scared of leaving behind the life I had just started to build here. Scared of taking a risk that might not work out. But deep down I knew I couldn't let fear hold me back. I had spent so many years letting fear dictate my decisions, letting it shape my actions, and I wasn't going to let it control me anymore. So, after a long discussion with myself, I made the decision. I would take the leap. The days leading up to the move were a whirlwind. There was so much to prepare, packing up my life, saying goodbye to friends, and trying to adjust to the idea of a completely new chapter. But with each passing day, I felt more certain that I was making the right choice. I was stepping into the unknown, And for the first time in a long time I felt truly alive. The flight to Paris was a blur of excitement and nervousness. When I arrived, I couldn't believe how beautiful the city was. The cobblestone streets, the Eiffel Tower in the distance. Everything was more than I had ever imagined. But more than anything, I felt a sense of freedom. This was my new beginning, my opportunity to redefine who I was. And as I looked out over the city from my new apartment, I knew that everything I had gone through had led me to this moment. This was the future I had been working toward. The first few weeks were overwhelming. The new office was challenging, and there were moments when I doubted myself. But slowly I started to find my rhythm. I found that I was capable of more than I had ever given myself credit for. I had learned to trust my instincts, to lead with confidence, and to stay grounded no matter what came my way. But the biggest lesson I learned was that it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to take things one step at a time. It's okay to feel uncertain. What matters is that you keep moving forward. And you keep believing that the future is waiting for you. It's waiting for you to take hold of it. And to create the life you've always wanted. Looking out over the Paris skyline, I knew that this was just the beginning. The future was unfolding in front of me. And I was ready to embrace it. It's funny, isn't it? How you can go through life thinking you know exactly what you want, only to realize years later that the things you thought you needed weren't really what you needed at all. I used to think that success was all about what I could achieve, how much I could prove to others, how many boxes I could check off on my to-do list. But now I know that real success isn't about the accolades, or the job title, or the accomplishments. It's about finding inner peace, about knowing who you are, and being comfortable with that person no matter what the world thinks. A few months after moving to Paris, I had started to feel like I was living someone else's life. The job, the new apartment, the people I had met. It was all supposed to be what I had dreamed of. But somewhere along the way I lost touch with what really mattered to me. I had been so focused on achieving everything I thought I was supposed to achieve, that I hadn't stopped to ask myself if I was truly happy. One evening, after a long day at work, I walked back to my apartment, feeling drained, like I had given everything I had, but still felt empty. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and sat down on the couch. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, and for the first time since I had moved in, I felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness. It wasn't that I didn't have friends here. I had made a few connections, but it was different. I had created this life, but I was living it in a way that didn't feel like me anymore. I thought about everything that had brought me to this point. The pain, the betrayal, the healing. All of it had pushed me to take risks, to push myself out of my comfort zone. And while that was important, I had forgotten one thing. I needed to take a step back and reconnect with myself. I needed to figure out what I wanted beyond the career, beyond the expectations, beyond everything that had been imposed on me by the world around me. So I made a decision that night. I was going to take a break from everything. I was going to slow down and really listen to myself. I booked a weekend getaway to the countryside. Just me, a small cottage, and nothing but the sound of the wind and the birds. No work, no distractions, no expectations. That weekend was the first time in a long time that I truly felt at peace. I woke up early, went for walks in the fields, and just sat there watching the sunrise, without any pressure to be anywhere or do anything. For the first time in months, I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I wasn't chasing success. I wasn't worrying about what people thought. I was simply being. And in that stillness I realized something. I had been running from myself. I had been chasing a version of success that didn't actually bring me joy. I had been ignoring the quiet voice inside me that longed for something different, something simpler. That was the turning point for me. I didn't need to keep running. I didn't need to keep proving myself. I just needed to be true to who I was and trust that the rest would fall into place. I didn't need to be constantly on the go, constantly achieving. I needed to find balance, peace, and contentment in the present moment. The next day I returned to Paris with a new mindset. I didn't rush to make changes immediately, but I began to make small adjustments. I started to say no to things that drained me, and yes to things that brought me joy. I took more time for myself, time to read, to meditate, to simply enjoy life without the pressure of constantly moving forward. And little by little I felt a shift. I was no longer running from my past or my own desires. I was embracing who I had become, and I was allowing myself to move at my own pace. Not at the pace the world expected of me. The realization didn't come all at once. But over time I understood that I didn't need to have all the answers. I didn't need to figure everything out right away. What I needed was to trust myself and to let life unfold at its own pace. And with that I felt truly free. It's funny how life works sometimes. How one small shift in perspective can change everything. After that weekend in the countryside, I felt like I had done a full 180. I wasn't the same person who had stepped on that plane to Paris months ago. The fear, the doubt, the overwhelming pressure, they no longer held the same power over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making decisions for myself, based on my own desires, not what was expected of me. I had started saying no to the things that drained me, and yes to things that felt true to my heart. The people I had been surrounding myself with, the work I had been doing, it wasn't the right fit anymore. I needed to make space for the things that truly aligned with who I had become. And so, I made some tough decisions. The first one came when I decided to leave the job I had worked so hard to get. It wasn't an easy choice, not by any means. The role I had taken in Paris was a dream job for so many people. But for me it had become a cage. I had poured myself into it, but I realized that it wasn't fulfilling me the way I thought it would. It wasn't the work that I had been missing. It was the passion, the purpose, the sense of contribution. I didn't want to be someone who just showed up for a paycheck. I wanted to do something that mattered to me, something that made a difference. I had a heart-to-heart conversation with Erica. I told her everything, the pressure, the stress, the lack of joy I was feeling. She was surprised, but she listened. And though I knew it would be a hard transition, I decided to leave my position and pursue something more meaningful. It wasn't about quitting, it was about choosing something that was more aligned with my values. I started researching ways to build a career that focused on the things I truly cared about, helping others, using my voice to make an impact. I started looking into nonprofit organizations, mental health initiatives, and even public speaking opportunities. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew that I had to take the leap if I wanted to create a life I could be proud of. The second shift came in my personal life. I had been casually dating, but I had realized that I wasn't ready to jump into anything serious. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me anymore, because I had already done that myself. But I did want to experience love in a healthier, more authentic way. And that meant letting go of any lingering feelings for Alex. I had spent months healing from his betrayal, but I had never fully let go of the idea of him. One afternoon I ran into him in a cafe. He looked the same, but something inside me had changed. The pain I had once felt wasn't there anymore. I didn't hate him. I didn't feel anything at all. I just felt free. I realized that I had forgiven him, not for him but for me. And that was the moment I knew I was truly healed. I took a deep breath, looked at him and smiled. "I'm happy for you," I said genuinely. "I hope you find what you're looking for." He looked taken aback, but he nodded. "You're different," he said. And for the first time I knew that the change had come from within me. I was no longer looking to the past for validation. I had moved forward. I had found peace within myself. Over the next few weeks I continued to focus on my personal growth. I spent more time with my family, rekindling relationships that had been strained by my focus on external achievements. I called my mother more often, making an effort to reconnect with her in a way that felt real and authentic. I spent time with my friends, laughing, talking, enjoying life, without any pressure to prove anything. Slowly I started to see the shift in all areas of my life. My work began to feel more aligned with who I was. My relationships became more fulfilling. And most importantly, I felt at peace with myself. The shift wasn't a one-time event. It was a process. A process of realizing that I didn't need to have everything figured out to be happy. That I didn't need to chase anyone else's definition of success. I could create my own path. And that path was mine alone. And as I continued forward, I realized something. This was only the beginning. It's funny how you can spend so much time waiting for something to change, hoping that somehow life will give you a sign, an answer, a direction. But the truth is, the only sign you need is the one that comes from within. The only direction that matters is the one you choose for yourself. The past few years have been a whirlwind, a mix of healing, growth, and transformation. But somewhere along the way I realized that I was still holding back. Even though I had come so far, even though I had accomplished so much, there was still a part of me that was afraid to truly leap. Afraid to take that final step into the unknown. But then I realized something. You can't live in the what-ifs. You can't keep waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect situation. Because life doesn't wait for things to be perfect. Life moves forward, and so do we. A few months ago I received an offer that would change everything. A company I had admired for years, one that aligned perfectly with my values, reached out to me. They wanted me to come on board as their creative director. It was everything I had ever wanted in a job. Exciting, challenging, fulfilling. But there was a catch. It would mean leaving Paris. It would mean leaving the life I had just started to build. The friends I had made, the city I had fallen in love with. It wasn't an easy decision. I sat with the offer for weeks, weighing the pros and cons. On one hand, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. On the other, it felt like I was leaving something behind. Something that had become my safe space. But then I remembered something I had learned over the past few years. Comfort doesn't always lead to growth. If I wanted to continue evolving, if I wanted to take my life to the next level, I had to step outside of my comfort zone. I had to take that final leap. So I made the decision. I packed up my things, said my goodbyes, and boarded a flight to a new chapter of my life. And as the plane took off, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't holding back. I was ready. The first few weeks in my new city were a blur. I was learning a new job, settling into a new home, and adjusting to a new environment. But every step I took felt like the right one. Every challenge I faced felt like an opportunity to grow, to become more of the person I had always dreamed of being. And as I settled into this new phase of my life, I realized something even more profound. It's not about finding the perfect moment or waiting for everything to fall into place. It's about embracing the journey. It's about trusting that each step you take will lead you to exactly where you need to be. I've learned so much in the past few years. I've learned that healing isn't linear, that growth doesn't happen overnight. But I've also learned that with each step forward, no matter how small, you are getting closer to the life you're meant to live. Today I stand at the beginning of a new chapter. One filled with unknowns but also filled with endless possibilities. And for the first time in my life I feel fully prepared for what's to come. I feel excited about the future, not because it's guaranteed, but because I know I'm strong enough to face whatever comes my way. This is the final leap. This is where everything comes together. And I'm ready to take it,